Hello, Shabbat Shalom. My name is Andrew Hodkinson, and every week, Friday, 6 p.m. Jerusalem time, I put out a topical teaching to help root the body of Messiah in the Commonwealth of Israel, to believe in Jacob's God, to trust in the sacrifice of Yeshua, and ultimately to encourage people to keep the Torah from the heart. This week, I'm going to look at the topic of the olive tree from Romans chapter 11, and we're going to discuss who or what this represents. And so for those who don't know, the general description we find in the book of Romans, and Romans really from chapters 1 to 9, it's about Jew and Greek and Gentiles, discussing things like salvation, justification, having the law, not having the law, those various arguments. But when you get to chapters 9 to 11, there's this shift to, you see, Paul starts using the word Israel, and you get this broader sense of the people of God. And it's in that context that we get this use of the olive tree. And so we are entitled to wonder what to make of this olive tree. And I think for many people, because of the historical testimony in a few places, it would seem to refer to the people of God. You can even see that in the modern day badge for Israel, that they use the two olive branches on the side of the menorah. And so it's often a common picture for the people of God. And I think it also works really well with understanding non-Jews from many different nations belonging to the idea, and this idea of grafting different olive trees into a different olive tree. And then there's also the idea of roots are there to, and Paul would say, be conscious of your roots. So this is also a really fitting idea. And then also a very clear idea about branches were broken off so that the nations might come in. And so the typical view that we have is that this is the people of God, and this comes from a kind of replacement theology background. And so when you look at this, most people would say, well, the roots, that's referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the covenant people. It's kind of justified a bit because of the ethnic Israel idea with these are natural branches. So we're talking about ethnic Israel. And then we get to Messiah, and there we read that this idea of branches being cut off. And even Messianic Jews will say, oh, this is about unbelieving Jews. And so many say, well, it would seem through the story of God that, the Jewish nation has been cut off from being the people of God. And so this may sound a bit harsh, but essentially that Israel was ethnic, and in Messiah's death, he's cut off that idea, and the covenant people Israel are to be the believers in Yeshua's new covenant. And then there are little elements in the passage that might justify this. We see this description of they are enemies of the gospel, hardness of heart, they've been disobedient, unfaithful. And although there's a lot of pushback and saying, yes, but the passage also says that the Jews are elect, that they are chosen of God, many will still read this and go, the description, however, says they are cut off. And so it's more like, yes, they're elect, they're chosen, they were destined for these things, but they have failed that. And so this may seem harsh, but we're not here to be woke and just give covenants to everyone and make sure everyone's happy. We have to be consistent with the passage. And so it may seem harsh, but it does seem quite consistent, this replacement view in many ways. However, it isn't consistent in terms of what we know from the prophets about Messiah. The idea that he would come and he would be a figure that would remove 99% of Jewish people from being the covenant nation, It's just not in keeping with the scriptures, where what we do see is, remember at Yeshua's circumcision, we read from Simeon who was there. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel. The Messiah was to comfort Israel. Anna the prophetess, this one would redeem Israel. We think of the description of this one is the one who will rebuild the temple of David. Also Genesis 49 will speak about Shiloh, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So it really falls short in terms of that. The other clear passage as well is John 10 and John 11, where it's like, yes, you've got the covenant people as the Jews, but no, the role of Messiah is there are others that he brings in. He's meant to extend the kingdom, paralleled with Isaiah 9 as well, that he will enlarge the nation. So it doesn't quite work, the replacement view. And then there's what many Messianic Jews will speak about, is that this is talking about spiritual Israel. Maybe you've heard that before. This idea of this begins, yes, roots in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it's like through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And so this works quite well in that we see with the fullness of time, nations start belonging to the covenant through the new covenant. And so a lot of people say, well, this is spiritual Israel, and now we get to partake of the blessings and the promises and the presence of God and the salvation. But this doesn't work well, because it's usually Messianic Jews who say this is the view we should have of this. It doesn't work well because, again, they themselves say that those that are cut off from this is the Jewish nation because of unbelief. And this has obviously the problems, because then we'd say, well, then they are cut off from the promises. They are cut off from the blessings and the presence and the salvation of God. And so I don't feel this works well either. There's just something that doesn't make sense. And then the other view is that, well, we should see this as maybe this is about New Testament believers. That let's not think of the tree and the roots go so far back as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and think of the story of Israel. Let's think of this more in a churchy kind of way, that let's remember that Messiah, he's described as this branch would come forth from the stump of Jesse, and he said, I'm the vine, you're the branches, remain in me, and he speaks of being cut off. And so maybe this is just about new covenant believers. And of course, this also doesn't really work well because of, well, firstly, we get a sense of the roots when Paul's saying, listen, be mindful of what supports you, the roots of this, that you get a depth to that. But also, again, there's this problem with the Jewish nation being cut off. If this is New Testament believers, then it explains the nations perhaps in a way, but why would the Jewish nation that is in unbelief be described as having had the new covenant and then Messiah casting them from the new covenant, where we know that it was only ever a remnant of Jewish people that ever believed in Messiah? I hold to what is known as two-house theology. And this is not your typical view of the people of God, but I think it makes brilliant sense concerning who the olive tree and what Paul is getting at here. Now, the first thing we need to understand is that Messiah is the covenant maker from the beginning. That when you read Ephesians chapter 2, that at that time you were without Messiah, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who sometimes were far off are made near by the blood of Messiah. The Son of God was making these covenants. We can look at various scriptures. We can look at Malachi 3, Judges chapter 2, Exodus 23, Exodus 34. And you see even there, it says with Jacob right there, where the craziness of getting two wives, obviously to put in the enmity that needed to play out between Joseph and Judah, we see him right back there as well, that no, Messiah is the one involved here. And then the other part that we think everyone should know is that if you understand the history of Israel, and Paul is saying branches were cut off so that you Gentiles could come into this olive tree, everyone should know what he's talking about. And that this is specifically referring to people who were not Jews. And he says, I pray for these, my kinsmen. This is not Jewish people. That the Jews represent the two tribal territories of Judah and Benjamin, and the Levites that are amongst them. But what Paul is referring to is the 10 tribes that were sown of God. We see this in Hosea chapter 1 with the description of Jezreel, a nation sown that they might be reaped in the nations, sowing a nation to reap the nations, and that they would be called sons of the living God. That's why, concerning the Gentiles, 2 chapters earlier than the olive tree, he quotes in chapter 9, verse 24 and 25, that part of Hosea, and saying he's calling you of the nations, and explaining the process by which the casting off and those that became lo ami, lo ruhama, how the nations came from that. This is also echoed by Peter in his little epistle, 1 Peter chapter 2. So we emphasize, I'm not going to go into full two-house doctrine, but this is the pattern that is laid out in Scripture. These are the ones that were cast off for the nations, and it messes things up. The Jews keep saying this is about Jewish unbelief in the Messiah. So why I think this is a good view is that it really maintains a broad view of the covenant people of God. And it also shows that no, we need to be conscious that when we talk on a people level, when we talk on a covenant level with the people, that the Jews, God chose to keep with the house of Judah, he would have mercy on them and remain always in covenant with them. That you could crucify the Lord of glory. That doesn't mean that he's going to negate the covenant. You can be rebellious towards God, obstinate, whatever. He will have mercy on whom he will have mercy, and he maintains the covenants as he plans. And so are Jews cut off? Sure, there are passages about the axes at the root, but we are to understand that as maybe some political headship, individuals in certain different ways, that yes, there's pruning and there's cutting of the Jewish people in certain ways, but not on that grand level of being the covenant people. And I really believe in Romans, Paul gives a bit of distinction here between the Jewish people in covenant, and it's always good to do this because you don't want to take away from their portion. But we understand firstly that the Jewish people, they are their nation. No one is to take their place as a people, and they're to occupy Judea and whatever portion of land God wishes for them. But there's also another uniqueness that we need to understand, and that is with regards to their election to the new covenant. Because it's a bit different to that of the nations in that, well, for them, it's a renewal of the covenant. And you'll often find that with Messianic Jews when they say, I've come to faith in Yeshua as the Messiah. They don't really say, I now believe in a new God. I believe in it doesn't feel new. It's more a renewal. It's like a greater understanding of their God. And this is important because they go from already being covenant people, but faith in Messiah just makes them renewed in that covenant. It doesn't bring them into the tree. That's different, however, with non-Jews. With the nations, when we come from Lo Ami, Lo Rahma, outsiders. But if we take up the new covenant, what is new for us, that we get brought into that Israel, that commonwealth of Israel. I also just want to deal with this part. I think it explains a little bit Romans chapter 11, verse 22. Behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God. On them which fell, severity, but towards you, goodness, if you continue in his goodness. And I've always thought this is a bit harsh, or it seems to be, Judah can do whatever and they don't get cut off, and yet it's like we stand in this way where we'll just get cut off again. But again, I think it just symbolizes the means by which we're attached is through the new covenant. If we choose to reject the new covenant, well, we go back to, our factory default is to go back to lo ami, not as people. And there is a separation here with the Jewish people, where they can reject the gospel, they can reject Messiah even in the renewal of the new covenant. And they will still be, so long as they belong to the Jewish nation and they identify with the Jewish nation, in a sense, they will still be considered the people of God. But to carry on reading here, and they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. Now, this isn't Jews, as said. He's not talking about those natural branches. He was talking about these 10 tribes, and that God can graft them in again. And he says, if you were cut out of an olive tree which is wild by nature, to always recognize, understand this, and you were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, this is talking about the 10 tribes, wherever they were in the scattering, they will, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree. Now, concerning the Jews and their factory default setting as going back to covenant people, it might sound harsh, but it's just the reality. And some people may avoid this view because they think it sounds a bit unfair, it doesn't sound right. And I think what often is happening here is people have the wrong idea of what it means to be the people of God or to be considered the covenant people. And often we see it as, oh, okay, so these are the faithful people, these are the saved people, and not at all. Yes, there's some Jews that do view it that way. Even in the book of Acts, there were some Jews who viewed it that way, and they said, well, get circumcised and then you're clean for salvation, as it were. But no, when we read the scriptures, what we see is, even if you are the covenant people, that does not mean you're living up to it. What the covenant is and what it means to be a part of the covenant people. It was not about these are the people who are going to be resurrected in the end days. They are to show the path for salvation, be a light unto the nations. And that's the key part. If you are a part of the covenant people, you are called to be a light. You are called to bring forth Jacob's God to the nations. And this we see beautifully in 1 Peter, spoken to specifically those that have come in through the scattering of Joseph of Ephraim. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We see the belonging there. A peculiar people, that you should show forth the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. There we get it, to be an example of his light to the world. In times we're not a people, but now are the people of God, had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. So I really believe that the two-house theological doctrine, I really think it wins out in a very healthy way. It firstly is making Messiah centered, really, that we can still see him as one, the light unto the nations, the one who said, I've come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And also to Judah, he is the one who will bring increase the nation. That makes a lot more sense. It also makes, I think, such a great, it's also got that conservative element where Paul is saying, you nations who belong to this, you're called to belong to this, come and join in the Commonwealth of Israel, but be conscious of your roots. And people need to do that. They need to understand their story in Israel. Learn about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Learn how Jacob was given the name Israel and destined to be a nation and a company of nations, and understand the process of how that came about. And then also just to understand the uniqueness of the Jewish calling, that even outside of the new covenant, they belong to the covenant. We wanted to be renewed in Messiah, that they understand the new covenant. But, and even there, please don't think I'm not saying they don't need the salvation of God. Of course they do. Everyone will. But even there, Messiah is going to be fair, and he will be righteous in whom he gives it. Some people are in ignorance. They don't see everything. He will be fair and apply his atonement as he sees fit. And everyone who, if God willing, we are in the kingdom, we will all say, it is just the grace of God that we are here. So in conclusion, I really think that the replacement theological view that really sees the Gentiles taking over the story, I think it's got some serious issues there. The spiritual Israel view also, there's challenges there. It sounds nice, but then again, that means you have to take away all the spiritual things, the blessings, the promises, the presence of salvation, whatever, from the Jewish people. That makes no sense. And then the New Testament people view, that's also, I really think, flawed. This really is about deep roots, starting from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Paul's just giving a very broad sense of the people of God. No doubt that this passage is still going to be wrestled with a lot. That this olive tree of Romans 11, we're trying to get in Paul's mind here, and it's not so easy, and it's hard to come with our 2,000 years later and really try and understand it. But through Messiah's help, I believe we can get there. And hopefully what I've shared is a healthy and God-fearing way of understanding it. So blessed Sabbath to all of you. I hope there's some food for thought. And until next time, Shabbat Shalom.